Hi everyone, you're watching the first of 3 videos focusing on definitions and descriptions. The scope of this video gets into the phrase and sentence level definitions, which are kind of the lower level foundational building blocks for other more sophisticated kinds of descriptions that we'll get to over the course of the unit. So let's get right on into it with talking about the value of defining something and some of the initial phrase and sentence level strategies.
Definitions are often the first step in technical communication. Before you can have a sophisticated conversation about, proposals or strategies, you have to make sure that everyone's words mean exactly the same thing. So that when you use a term with a meaning attached to it, the audience you're speaking to has that same meaning. We've already done a version of this in our own technical communication when we looked at our standards of excellence in technical communication. Conciseness, clarity, comprehensiveness, etc. Before we can get into any of the genres, it's necessary for everyone to have a common ground. Otherwise, we'd be looking at a draft of something, and if I say, I think there's a problem with conciseness here, and everyone has a slightly different understanding of what exactly that means, it's not very useful communication. You see this happening all the time on a more sophisticated level, in addition to the level of vocabulary. What I'm going to show you now is a sentence that was in a human resource packet that I got when I was starting a job at a university. Qualifying employees and their families may be eligible for tuition waivers. Now, that's a nice, enticing sentence, but there's a lot of terms and concepts that really need to be sharpened. We'll start with that word qualifying. What do we mean by qualifying at this point? Do they have to have worked there for a certain number of years? Do they have to have had a certain number of hours? Like, for example, if they have to work above 30 hours a week? And then you've got the word employees. Does employees mean faculty or does it mean staff? Could somebody working in security or on the janitorial or administrative assistants also get this tuition break? Then we look at the word families. Does families mean spouses, or does it mean spouses, children? How far out does that extend? Does it extend to adopted children, same-sex domestic partnerships, or where are the boundaries of that term? For that matter, eligible for, that is kind of similar to qualifying. It makes a lot of gestures for clauses and outs that you want to get locked down. When I first saw this sentence, my wife was thinking about going back for a graduate degree, and so I saw that word tuition, and my first thought was, all right, is that just undergrad, or is that graduate and undergraduate? And finally, the word waivers. If you're going to talk about waivers, there's 2 ways you can do it. One, someone pays tuition up front, and then upon completion of a course, tuition is reimbursed. And the other is you sign up for a course and then just don't even bother paying the tuition at all. Those are very different circumstances, and it's nice to know which one is being talked about. Now, you can see this happening with purely technical terms, too. I had a student once who was writing an extended description for a boss that, in their own admission, had very limited knowledge of technical concepts, and the sentence in this draft was, setting up a networked security camera is a simple matter of establishing a static IP address, default gateway, and subnet mask. So I got to the end of that sentence and went, I know static IP address, default gateway, and subnet mask are pretty basic terms for a network admin, but when you start talking to somebody that doesn't have this kind of technical framework, then you're going to need to clarify those terms or you're never going to be able to make the point and get what you want approved. Now, there are 4 levels of defining terms, kind of 4 tiers, each in increasing complexity. The first is phrase definition. These are definitions that are embedded within the interior of a sentence. One step above that is a sentence-level definition. A sentence-level definition is a definition that occurs, as you would imagine, on the level of the sentence, following a very particular format, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Extended definitions are multi-sentence, occurring on the paragraph level. And then finally, you have extended descriptions. And extended descriptions are multi-paragraph descriptions of a concept or an item. And they're going to take different strategies used in extended definitions and trying to play them off one another. This particular video is going to focus in on phrase definitions and sentence definitions. So let's go ahead and get right to that. A phrase definition involves embedding a quick definition into an existing sentence while not interrupting its logical syntax, sometimes known as a parenthetical definition. I'm not going to talk too much about phrase definitions because everyone kind of innately understands how to use them. If you're going through a sentence and there's a term you think a reader might not know, put it in parentheses or offset the definition with a comma, and then just describe exactly what the term actually means. I usually go with parentheses because it sends a signal to a reader that they can kind of skip over that part if they already know the term in place. Now, here's a quick tip on those. If you're unsure whether to use a phrase-level definition, put it in. Like I just mentioned, people who know what terms mean will just sort of skip over them, but if you're using a term and somebody doesn't know the meaning, then that's a much more damaging reality in the document than if you're defining a concept or a term somebody already knows. Sometimes people worry about dumbing down a document too much, and that I guess can be a worry if you know you're talking to someone who's a real expert, but phrase-level definitions are kind of a better safe than sorry concept, speaking generally. Then we have a sentence definition. A sentence definition is a definition that occurs on the level of the sentence and follows a very specific pattern. That pattern is item equals category plus distinguishing characteristics. Now that is an almost arithmetic way of describing the syntax and logic of sentence level definitions. Item would be the actual thing you're trying to define. Category is the general class of things that that item belongs to. And distinguishing characteristics are things that are only true about that particular item that would not be true about other items within the category. So let's take a look at how this basic framework actually operates, starting with a pretty simple thing to define. Say you're trying to define a pen using a sentence-level format. A pen is a writing utensil that uses ink to create markings. So you have a pen is a writing utensil, that's the category of items, that uses ink to create markings. Those are the distinguishing characteristics, things true about pens that are generally not true about crayons or pencils or chalk, for example. Or you can talk about shorting if you're dealing with something that's more of a traditional business or finance concept. Shorting is an investment strategy in which investors intentionally configure investments against an asset class which they believe will soon experience losses. Shorting is the item, investment strategy is the category, and then the remainder would be the distinguishing characteristics. What distinguishes shorting as opposed to other investment strategies? If for the video game folks in the crowd, let's talk about cutscene. A cutscene is a point in a video game where user-directed play stops and a cinematic or graphic episode advances the overall narrative. Cutscene item, point in a video game category, and then the distinguishing characteristics. And you can use this for network admin work too. DHCP, for example. DHCP is a role configuration that enables a computer, or server in this case, to assign IP addresses to other devices in the network. DHCP is the item, role configuration is the category, and then the distinguishing characteristics. Now this is a pretty straightforward strategy, and most people don't have a problem with it once they internalize it, but there are a couple of gotcha moments. Tip 1 is to be specific about both categories and distinguishing characteristics. Now, generally, in technical communication, you should never use a general or a vague sentence when there's an opportunity to use a specific one, and that's particularly true when you're trying to nail down with precision what a concept actually is all about. So you have a sentence like this: a smartphone is a piece of technology that fits in your pocket. That is not a very good sentence level definition. Smartphone is fine for an item, but piece of technology could be lots of different things, everything from a voice recorder to a MP3 player, and there are lots of other things that can fit in your pocket that have nothing to do with the kind of technology for a smartphone. So you would need to get something that hits to the actual category and distinguishing characteristics a little bit more precisely, and it's just not going to work as a sentence. Tip number 2 is don't describe general items if you're describing specific classes of items. You can describe things that are general or describe things that are specific, but you got to be clear on which one you're describing. So you have the sentence, a Galaxy S3 is a smartphone that lets users check email, download apps, and search the web. Now, Galaxy S3 is fine for an item, smartphone is pretty good for a category, but all those distinguishing characteristics could apply to any single smartphone. So what is it that would make a Galaxy S3 unique and distinctive? Without those distinctive traits, it's not going to quite do the job as a sentence-level definition. Tip 3 is avoid circular definitions, which are definitions that simply restate the term. I was looking in a professional magazine a couple of months ago, and I encountered the following sentence about virtualization. A virtual computer is a computer that is virtual. I got to that sentence and kind of rolled my eyes and went, well, that was illuminating. That's simply a circular definition. It just restates the initial premise, doesn't ever get to the category or the distinguishing characteristics, and simply renames them instead. So that's not going to do the job. So that's a little bit about phrase and sentence level definitions. The next videos in this module are going to talk about extended definitions and then following on into extended descriptions.